And hello YouTube, this is Thomas Judge back once again with another instalment of my ongoing weekly series Till the Fabled End. And today we're going to be looking at Fables Deluxe Edition Book 12. Before we jump into it, I just want to say we're going to slightly reset, or I'm going to take a different tack with these reviews, at least for the next few videos, on the basis of some feedback that I've got some viewers. I don't enjoy feedback, but it's always good to try and learn and try and make things better. Some people have complained that my overviews or my reviews are too vague and I don't go into enough detail and I keep stuff really vague and top level and I don't kind of go into enough of the nuts and bolts of any particular hardcover that I'm looking at. I find this a little bit surprising because I think my videos are very long-winded and very tedious, but it seems like people want more talking and more detail. But I suppose what people really want is much more specific detail, and I'm always very wary not to give spoilers in what I talk about. Because I'm conscious some people just watch these and may watch all of these before they read any of the comics. So I don't want to spoil it. That said, if people do want to know more about it, and that appears to be the appetite, I'm going to take a slightly different and more detailed tack here. I'm not going to go through this page by page because again I think it's really bad form to kind of show a comic page by page on the internet because some unscrupulous person is just going to try to read it frame by frame, which isn't a good thing for anyone. But what I will do, I'm going to take a more detailed approach today. So this might be a slightly longer video. I really like to get the thoughts of anyone watching as to whether or not you prefer a slightly more detailed or more rigorous approach. But with no further ado, Fables, Book 12. So, we have the usual cover here. This is a witch in the Fables universe. She's in a superhero outfit for a reason, which we'll go into. Here we've got Bigby. Here we've got a character in a new suit of armour. And here we've got Bigby's father, the North Wind, who's going to be pivotal for this book. In the spine, standard spine format we have there, and then on the back, and I'm not going to read this out, but this is just the usual Once Upon a Time blurb with a relatively generic blurb on the back, just saying, what if fables were real and lived in New York, and so on. On the inside flap we have pull quotes. On the rear flap we have our normal biography of Bill Willingham, and we've got our very consistent internal purple skyline as our internal end pages. Having a look at the picture under the cover, this is, of course, the image from the dust jacket. So we've got that here. Bind quality is very good. It's very glossy, it's very sturdy. The binding is nice and tight, but not too tight. You can see it lays open nice and flat with no real gutter loss. Because the way that these issues are framed and they're not full bleed meaning that they go right to the edge, because they're not full bleed and they have this kind of very conventional, almost woodcut framing around them, a little bit of gutter loss isn't a problem, but we don't have any. It lies nice and flat. Okay. It feels very calm and soothing to be doing this in such slow detail. I do wonder at what point in the video people are going to go, nope, no, this is too boring. Let's have a look at the contents, as we often do. So the contents here is issues 101 to 113. So 13 issues here. And the story arcs that we're going to be looking at, there's an introduction by Paul Levitz, which is very, very good. There's then a story called The Ascent, and then there's a arc called Super Team, which we'll talk about in just a moment. We then have Waking Beauty, and then an arc called Inherit the Wind. Then all in a single night, in those days, and some bonus features. As I said last week, it's not really, I don't think it's really salient to be mapping this and saying, oh, this is issue 102, this is issue 103, that sort of thing, because they don't really quite map very easily like that. And of course it is worth noting, as I've said several times, that the mapping in the hardcovers doesn't necessarily transpose one-to-one with the trade paperback. So a hardcover in the deluxe edition isn't necessarily two specific trade paperbacks. If that was the case, if this was something like the Walking Dead deluxe editions, you'd be able to go, oh, number 12, is it? That means it must be trade paperback 23 and 24. That's not how it works in Fables, and I would recommend checking out the Wikipedia page for a breakdown thereof. This is an introduction by Paul Levitz. I will say, this is one of my favourite introductions of all the hardcovers. It's really good. it's really good. But I'm a big fan of Paul Levitz as a writer. He can be a bit hit and miss. I wasn't a fan of his Green Lantern, but he can also be quite good. So starting off with issue 101, we have a story here called The Ascent, which is a really interesting story. At this point, Buffkin, the winged monkey, is trapped inside the business office, which is kind of a cool, mysterious kind of annex to Fabletown. And he's trapped inside the business office, and it's about him escaping the business office. And in escaping the business office, he does it in quite a cool, quite a mythic, fable-like way, and then it leads on to a cliffhanger, and it's interesting to see where that cliffhanger goes. We then go into the next longer story arc, which is this one called, I think it's called Superpowers or Super Fables. What was it called? Super Team. So in this, the Fables are still consolidating their approach to try to vanquish Mr. Dark. And in so doing, there's several things that they try to do. And one of them is they decide to make their own super team, as in superhero team. I think the premise behind this is what's already been established in Fables is that belief from the mundane human people in the world provides Fables their powers. If you're really well loved or really has a huge amount of belief and you're in lots of story tales, you'll be more powerful as a Fable. And so building on this idea of kind of consensual mass gestalt belief in a particular trope or an archetype, what happens here is the character of Pinocchio decides to become the man in the chair. You see him here in a wheelchair, because every super team has a man in the chair sort of coordinating things. They come up with their own little super team logo, and what we'll see is that there are actually other characters. So for example, this particular witch wears like a superhero outfit, and they decide to have like a tiny person, the equivalent of a wasp or an Ant-Man sort of character, and so on. So that's what they're tapping into over these few issues, because what they want to do is make an Avengers-like super team powered by the collective belief of the world that seems to like superheroes much more than it likes fables and fairy tales now. So that's a really interesting concept, very meta, and it could have gotten old and quite stale, but it was dealt with very well. At the same time, we also have the ongoing arc of Nurse Sprat, who's this character here, who her arc of self-development and kind of descent into evil is really, really interesting. And yeah, it's very, very enjoyable. Of course, Mr. Dark remains the main antagonist and remains very terrifying and evil and so on. So as we go into the next issue, we have this cover. So this, for the Fable Super Team cover, is the cover of 103. And it's actually the cover of the trade paperback as well. Again, the same basic premise applies. This is all very much about the idea of defeating Mr. Dark. And here we've got Nurse Sprat and her redemption. I don't know who this character is. I initially assumed it was Bernard the Fox from the previous hardcover, because Bernard the Fox gets turned into a human, but it's not. So I don't know who he is. Anyway, the story continues, and is very much about this sort of super team being developed. They have their fancy costume, they have their fancy outfits, and so on. Yeah. And it's good, it's interesting, and it doesn't overstay its welcome. And then you have someone build a big suit of armour as like an Iron Man equivalent for their super team. As it continues, see, F-Men. So it's very much, this is exactly how old X-Men issues used to be laid out back in the day, with character bubbles like this kind of font and approach. So they're very much riffing on the idea of superhero comics at this stage, and battles and so on and so forth. So it's pretty good. It's pretty interesting. I personally was much more interested in this side about Nurse Sprat and her descent into evil and her kind of character arc there. But the general heroics and explosions and bits and pieces were good, and it's a good play and a good riff on superhero comics. We then move on into the next issue, which is 105 at this point, and what we're talking about here is Bigby's father, the North Wind, and various shenanigans that he's up to. Again, the evolution of Nurse Sprat. And then, yeah, again, issue by issue. So what happens here now is there's a massive battle, and long story short, Mr. Dark ends up getting vanquished, basically, is what happens here. So it feels very much like the last arc was kind of a double bluff or a double blind, in that he almost got vanquished and he didn't get vanquished, and then in this arc it seems that he is perpetually vanquished. Which then takes us into Fables 107. Now, obviously there's 150 issues of Fables, so it does make me wonder exactly what the intention is here. Sorry, just double checking the zoom. It does make me wonder what the intention is here in terms of like a story arc or things like that. Then we have this story, Awaking Beauty, which is very much just about stuff that's going on in the homelands where the adversary is. And then we come back to this story here, which essentially is much more about the mythos of the North Wind and the history of the North Wind and so on. We've got a few bits and pieces of Buffkin's story continues, Nurse Spratt's story continues. Yeah, it's okay. I mean, I found it interesting. There's Mr. Dark again. I found it like interesting, but ultimately it started to get into this slightly Game of Thronesy kind of territory of people vying to sort of succeed the king or to have an empire or various bits and pieces. And I don't really feel like the other winds that get introduced, because there's the other sort of major forces of the universe here, the different winds, not just the North Wind, I guess, the other winds. They get introduced, and they're kind of like politicking and their nonsense was just a little bit, I don't know, just felt a bit cliched. Anyway, so we continue on. The story continues. We've got more stuff here about Buffkin and the like. We've got more stories here about Bigby and Snow White and their children and what's happening now that the North Wind is no longer in the picture. So yeah, it's a good, sensible arc. And then what we have here is some Christmas-related stuff, which is fine. Standard Christmas issues. There's a bit of a Ebenezer Scrooge Christmas Carol sort of vibe here. So Rose Red gets visited by 3 ghosts and blah 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 blah. It's not very inventive. I mean, I can only hope that it has a longer term kind of impact on the story. This being the 3rd ghost, but right now it feels a little bit cliched. I've seen it before, but I'm willing to give Bill Willingham the benefit of the doubt. Continuing on here, we then have this story here, A Delicate Balance, which is quite good. It's more stories about the homelands and the adversaries and things like that. So these are more just kind of vignette stories, like what if stories, more than anything else. Not even what if, they're just kind of like little side stories, like in the world of Fables, this stuff is going on. That takes us to the end of this deluxe edition hardcover. We then have Tales from the Woodland Vaults, which is the usual kind of extra features. You can see here some alternative superhero outfits that they wanted to come up with. Bigby does look a fair bit like Wolverine, let's not lie. More sketches there, which are always good. Always enjoy seeing those. And then, of course, the bio at the end. So overall, the cut and thrust of this, of Volume 12 of the Deluxe Editions, is the dispatch of Mr. Dark as an antagonist. Now, he's only been around for Book 10, 11, and now 12. Well, I guess part of Book 9 as well. So the fact that they dispatched him, I would like to think this is the last we see of him, on the basis that he wasn't like the Adversary, which was a really cool antagonist that took 9 hardcovers to kind of get to the end of. I don't like the idea of arbitrary antagonists. I know I banged on about it quite a lot over the last few videos, but I think that's very true. Mr. Dark is about as original as his name. So I'm glad we've seen the end of that, but that said, I am now concerned as to where this is going. We have another almost 40 issues of Fables to go. Where are they going with it? I would like to think Bill Willingham's going to hold his nerve and just continue having kind of rich tapestry world-building stories about the Fables, because that I could happily enjoy and read. I don't want a contrived plot for the sake of it, and I think this plot about the Kingdom of the North Wind and who's going to be the new North Wind, etc., etc., it feels a little bit like that. It's like a laboured plot for a laboured plot's sake. But that said, I'm going to keep as much of an open mind as I can. Okay, hopefully that was helpful for everyone. Let me know what you think about the new format. Let me know what you think about the new kind of like depth and detail that I'm going into on the story. It's a little bit more structured, but it does have a lot more spoilers, at least from my perspective. So I'm kind of in two minds about that. So please do let me know. Yeah, hold on. Is that in focus? Yeah. But yeah, until next time, our homework for next week is going to be Deluxe Edition, Book 13.
Alright, thanks for watching everybody. As always, please like, comment, subscribe. As always, please follow me on Twitter at I am Thomas Judge, where I will post a daily review of whatever comics I've been reading. You can get an idea of what I'm up to on the channel. And as always, please support the channel by heading over to Amazon.com and checking out my prose novel about superheroes. It's a completely original piece of work. The first episode in it is called Arrivals, and the series as a whole is called No Gods or Kings. You can find an excerpt of that on my website, nogodsorkings.com. Until next time, everybody, stay classy.